is just fantastic.
Captain's Log, Subdate 21229.3. I have written my New Year's resolutions a little late, and decided that front and centre should be a series of debates on capital punishment and the pros and cons of using cod liver oil as a meal. Welcome everyone to the Halls of Injustice. This is a bit of a different one. If you hadn't noticed from the title, there is no name for an inmate, and there's a very good reason for that. There were some recent changes made to UK law that took my interest and also mean we can go back to a case from the Halls of Injustice number 2, Reynard Sanaga. But there is one additional person to add to this as well, called Joseph Mccann. Reynard Sanaga, in case you don't want to go back and watch the second Halls of Injustice, which is linked down below, was convicted earlier this year and given a concurrent life sentence for over 159 offences against men. There were 4 trials that took place between 2018 and 2020. His minimum term is 30 years. In that video, I believe I said, whole life, seriously fam, you ain't coming out. Joseph Mccann happened before I started the Halls of Injustice series. He committed a number of attacks in Hertfordshire, London, Greater Manchester and Cheshire against 11 strangers ranging in age from 11 years old to a 71-year-old woman. He spent a lot of time evading police and was eventually found after his, air quotes, support network failed him. He was convicted of 37 offences and given 33 life sentences, and ordered to serve 30 years before he can be considered for parole. Neither of these two gentlemen, in my mind, should be ever allowed outside of a prison cell or an ISO cube. But that is my opinion on what they have done, being prolific in what they have done to other people, and how they have shown a literal 0% of any remorse for what they did to all the people they harmed. I should now say, Reynard Sanaga was convicted of over 150 crimes, but it is believed there are 60 more people to find to add to the convictions, and they are still looking for those people, because understandably they want to ensure that justice has in fact been served. The reason these two men have been raised is because the Attorney General wasn't overly fond of the sentence they were given, and believed that 30 years was not good enough. I should now state, for those two men with those sentences to be released, they would be at least 65 and 67. And it should also be stated Reynard Sanaga was born in Indonesia. I think he should be sent back there the moment his term is completed if we're going to abide by the idea of not a whole life term. Do your time first, but make sure the Indonesian government's the one paying for it. That part could well be a very unpopular opinion. So the Attorney General issued an appeal and took this legally all the way to the High Court. And because of sheeple crowd control, this has been delayed for the better part of 11 months, as Reynard Sanaga was convicted and sentenced in January. Yes, this has not been an easy one, but it has yielded a result, which is why we are here today, to update the sentence of Reynard Sanaga and also sentence Joseph Mccann, because seriously, you belong in one of my cubes. I got my sister some Lego for Christmas. One of those you'll be existing within. Maybe I should get someone to draw the ISO cubes as Lego blocks.
Can someone get an artist to do that for me?
The Attorney General's views on 30 years minimum was that those sentences were unduly lenient. And of course you base that on the vast number of people that have been negatively impacted by these two bozos. 5 senior judges at the High Court, which would include Lord Chief Justice Lord Burnett and the President of the Queen's Bench Division, Dame Victoria Sharp, presided over this appeal. And on Friday they published their judgment. I'm not entirely in favour of it, as it does raise some rather interesting questions about what we determine to be worthy of a whole life term. I personally think if you steal a pack of chewing gum, it should be a whole life term. And if you don't slap a police officer around the face, you should get a whole life term. But that's just me. Do I need my sarcasm signed for that? So in their judgment they said, "We are thus unable to accept the submission that 2 offenders should have received a whole life tariff," adding that in the collective experience of this court, the cases of Mccann and Sanaga, albeit very different on their individual facts, come within the category of the most serious cases involving a campaign of GRAPE to have been tried in England and Wales. Obviously, they've omitted the case of Richard Huckle, what with him being deceased now. F for Paul Fitzgerald? The ruling also states, neither man has shown any remorse, and the long-term psychological damage for at least some of the victims in both trials is profound, and will only be understood in the years to come. So what are the updated sentences? If at all, of course. They have ruled out whole life terms, but of course they are working under the premise that 30 years, then being 65 and 67, will not in and of itself become a whole life term. You can never truly rule it out. Natural causes is what I'm shooting for here. The updated sentences are as follows. Reynard Sanaga, sentenced to minimum 30 years in prison for over 150 offences, possibly up to 206, will now serve a minimum of 40 years in prison. And the same applies to Joseph Mccann, who will also serve a minimum of 40 years in prison. But we do have whole life terms, and I still maintain the severity of this particular type of crime warrants a whole life term. There are some people who should never be allowed out, ever. And I firmly believe Reynard Sanaga and Joseph Mccann qualify. I have in the past had discussions with people about severity of sentence and whether that should impact privileges one has when in a prison. It is a difficult one to navigate. To means assess is tricky, which is why I support whole life term, and seriously, you don't get the Wi-Fi password. And no commissary either. You live on Nutrilo for 40 years. Your taste buds are gonna be ruined. The sentence, to get back to the more serious aspect of this, endorses the line of authority that does not shut the door to a whole life tariff in a non-life-ending case. Examples included have boom-boom devices being planted on commercial airliners that fail to boom, or interventions by the authorities that prevent an act of mass life ending. The judges have also said that this does not minimize the seriousness of their offending, but instead to ensure that the most severe sentence in our jurisdiction is reserved, save exceptionally, either for the most serious case involving loss of life, or when a substantive plan to end a life or similar seriousness is interrupted close to fulfillment. There is a statement, an impact statement linked down below. Understandably, any victim is going to say no, whole term, but that is why they are not allowed to judge someone. In the more legal sense, not personal. There was a statement issued after the ruling by Solicitor General Michael Ellis, who said that both offenders carried out some of the most heinous and depraved attacks that shocked the nation. I am grateful for the guidance the court gave about the whole life orders, and I'm pleased the court imposed a longer minimum term. I hope this brings some solace to the victims of these despicable crimes. I should now update then, as both men are 35 and 37, they will now be 75 and 77 when they are released possibly and or deported, more than likely, in the case of Sanaga. With the changes to UK law in this context, I'd love to know what you all think. So please do let me know in the comments down below. If I don't see you on Twitch tonight for what I think might be some fishing, have a fantastic day, and thank you all for listening.